Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into ancient Egypt, where the desert meets the green ribbon of the Nile. Picture the river at dawn, wide and calm, a mirror that catches the first streaks of pink light while ibis birds flap lazily above. The air is still cool, though you already sense the day will bring heat heavy enough to flatten you if you're not used to it. In fact, you probably wouldn't survive the first week here without some serious acclimation, and that's before the local mosquitoes even get a taste of you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching, go ahead and let me know your location and the local time down in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake on a reed mat, the smell of smoke from last night's small cooking fire still faint on your clothes. The clay walls of your mud brick house are warm to the touch even at sunrise, already storing up the heat of the day like a patient oven. Somewhere nearby, a rooster you don't own insists on becoming everyone's alarm clock. Chickens, by the way, were latecomers to Egypt, but in this imagined morning, one struts past anyway because historical timelines don't always match what you picture. And historians still argue whether domestic fowl were introduced here around the New Kingdom or much later. Stepping outside, you hear the village beginning to stir. The Nile gleams just beyond the fields, the lifeline of everything around you. Without the river's flood, the soil would be dust and stone. With it, the land transforms into ribbons of green so intense they look like they've been painted on by hand. Mainstream history tells us that the flooding was fairly predictable, enough that entire calendars were built around it. Farmers prayed for a good flood, not too shallow, not too high, like Goldilocks with water levels. As you trudge toward the riverbank, the ground feels soft under your feet, still damp from irrigation channels cut by hand. Water buffaloes stand in the shallows flicking their tails, looking unimpressed with human industry. Somewhere a boy is already singing to himself as he drives a small herd of goats toward a patch of grass. If you're squinting, the whole scene looks timeless, as though this morning could be happening 3,000 years ago, or yesterday. You lean down, scoop up a handful of Nile water and watch it drip back through your fingers. It's murkier than you expected. Even in antiquity, Egyptians worried about water quality. Papyrus scrolls mention boiling and straining methods, though whether they worked effectively is still debated. One quirky tidbit, some texts recommend using crushed barley seeds to purify water, which sounds suspiciously like an excuse to brew more beer, but maybe that was just multitasking. The sun pushes higher, lighting the tops of palm trees until they glow like fiery spears. You smell bread baking already, flat loaves slapped onto hot stones. Families work together, with women and girls kneading dough while small boys stoke fires. The aroma is rich, nutty, and almost sweet. You can't help but feel a pang of hunger, though you remember that breakfast comes later. First, there are morning chores, and no, nobody has invented coffee yet, so you'll have to get through this on sheer Nile-side determination. Your neighbor waves as he passes, carrying a basket of fish strung together like a wriggling necklace. Fishing was one of the earliest Nile traditions, though the methods varied: nets, hooks, even harpoons for bigger catches. Some scholars say certain fish species were taboo to eat depending on the region. Imagine refusing a perfectly good tilapia because the local temple frowned upon it. Historians still argue whether those taboos were strictly enforced or just loosely observed. A small child runs past you barefoot, giggling, and tosses a mud ball that misses your head by inches. You realize sandals would have been a good idea, but shoes were optional luxuries for most villagers. The ground is uneven but soft, warm already. You hear the bray of a donkey, see its long ears twitch, and realize just how central these animals were. Donkeys hauled water jars, carried crops, and stubbornly resisted orders, pretty much the same as they do today. As the day begins, you sense the rhythm of life falling into place. Chores, meals, prayers, gossip, and endless work tied to the land. It's not glamorous, not filled with golden treasures or dramatic hieroglyphic epics, but it's life as most Egyptians knew it. Simple, repetitive, sometimes backbreaking, and yet strangely soothing, because everything has its cycle, as reliable as the river itself. You take one last look at the shimmering Nile. It seems calm now, but you know its mood shift. gentle floods, violent surges, and years of drought that could make entire villages vanish. For this moment, though, it's a mirror to the rising sun, whispering the start of another day that looks so ordinary and yet carries the weight of millennia in its ripples.
You shuffle back from the riverbank, stomach growling a little because it's finally time for breakfast. Now, don't expect scrambled eggs, pancakes, or a cinnamon latte here. Ancient Egyptian mornings are built on bread and beer. That's it. The so-called breakfast of champions. The bread is dense, coarse, and speckled with bits of chaff and grit that have sneaked in during the grinding of grain. The stones used to crush emmer wheat leave tiny fragments behind, so when you chew, it's a little like biting into a deliciously flavored sandpaper. Archaeologists studying mummies often find worn-down teeth, ground almost flat from decades of eating this crunchy delight. On the bright side, you won't need to floss tonight. Next comes the beer. Forget the frothy, golden drink you picture from your local pub. Egyptian beer is more like a thick, sweet, porridge-ish liquid. Sometimes it's chunky enough that you'd almost need a spoon. But in a land with a blazing sun and limited clean water, this murky brew is safe, filling, and, most importantly, mildly intoxicating. Perfect for taking the edge off another day in the fields. Historians still argue whether it was nutritious enough to count as a meal on its own, or if that's just wishful thinking from ancient farmers who didn't want to cook more food. The process of brewing involves baking a batch of half-cooked bread, crumbling it into vats, mixing with water, and letting it all bubble into a tangy concoction. Some batches even have dates or honey added, making them sweeter. You take a sip, feel the faint fizz, and imagine villagers clinking clay mugs together, mumbling something like cheers, though they probably didn't use that exact word. It's a surprisingly communal moment. As you sit cross-legged with a group, tearing hunks of bread and dipping them in a smear of beans or onions, you notice how central food is to daily rituals. Sharing is survival. Without the collective storage of grain in silos, carefully counted and taxed, of course, famine would strike far more often. One mainstream fact you might not realize, bakers often work directly for temples or estates, their production tied to religious offerings as much as to family tables. And yet, quirks abound. Records mention workers being paid in bread and beer rations. Imagine doing a full day of stone hauling and getting handed 5 loaves and 2 jugs at the end. Forget direct deposits or checks. Your paycheck is literally dinner. Sometimes the beer allotment was so generous, you wonder how anyone got anything done. Maybe that explains the occasional wobbly hieroglyph line carved on a tomb wall. There's also the matter of onions. Yes, onions. Egyptians adored them, so much so that some were placed in tombs as offerings. You chew into one now, sharp and spicy, your eyes watering. Was this breakfast or self-inflicted punishment? Hard to tell. Historians still debate whether onions had religious symbolism, possibly tied to their layered shape, or whether they were just cheap, abundant, and good at keeping away mosquitoes, or friends, depending on your breath. Children run by, their faces sticky from date syrup, laughing with mouths full of crumbs. Someone nearby tries to sing a tune while tapping a little drum, though it's too early for most people's taste. A sleepy father mutters that the beer isn't strong enough, and everyone chuckles knowingly. Humor hasn't changed much in 4,000 years. You take another bite, crunching through grit again, and think about how this humble meal has powered empires, monuments, and endless cycles of life along the Nile. It's not glamorous, but it's deeply human. Each chew ties you to thousands of years of breakfasts, the kind no one writes epic poems about, yet the kind that truly sustains a civilization. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and your belly is finally full, though perhaps not comfortably so. Bread lodged in your teeth, a faint buzz from the beer, and the day stretches ahead. Time to stand, stretch, and wonder what scratchy outfit you're about to wear into this long, hot morning.
Your belly is full, your head is pleasantly fuzzy from that thick beer, and now comes the moment of deciding what to wear. Spoiler, it won't be complicated. Ancient Egyptian wardrobes are not exactly bursting with options. Still, you tug at a folded length of linen and prepare yourself for the scratchy embrace of history's most practical fabric. Linen, spun from flax plants, rules every closet. Cotton and silk are still centuries away from strutting your stuff here. The threads are pale, almost white, and when freshly woven, they gleam faintly in the sun. But don't get too romantic about it. Most people's tunics are coarse, stiff, and about as comfortable as wearing a bed sheet that's been washed with gravel. Richer folk might enjoy softer, finely pleated linen that ripples elegantly when they move, while you, humble villager, wrestle with a fabric that feels like it's exfoliating your skin with every step. The mainstream fact is that Egyptians wore linen not only because it kept them cool, but also because they believed wool was ritually unclean. Wool might keep you warm, but in this climate, it just wasn't worth the sweat. So you wrap the garment around you, tie it with a simple belt, and try not to scratch. Historians still argue whether everyone pleated their clothes at home or if that delicate accordion style was reserved for the upper classes with servants who had the patience of saints. And here comes the fun part: accessories. You don't leave the house without a charm or two because protection from bad luck is always in fashion. Maybe you slip on an amulet in the shape of the Eye of Horus, a tiny phaon bead strung on cord, believed to ward off illness and envy. Or perhaps a scarab beetle, carved from green stone, because who doesn't want a good luck bug hanging around their neck? Some folks even carried little figures of Bes, the short, squat, grinning household god, who was basically the ancient Egyptian version of a protective garden gnome. Quirky, yes, but effective, or at least reassuring. Children are smeared with protective ointments too, sometimes thick layers of oil and resins that glisten in the sunlight. One neighbor pats a squirming toddler coated like a roast chicken, muttering blessings under her breath. You've heard odd remedies about mixing crocodile dung with oil to keep away both sunburn and evil spirits. Maybe it works, maybe it just makes you unpopular at parties. Historians still argue whether crocodile dung sunscreen was widely practiced or just an outlandish recipe noted in a single medical scroll. Either way, you make a mental note to stick to shade. You glance at your reflection in a pot of water. Linen tunic, slightly uneven, amulet hanging awkwardly, hair cropped short. Hairstyles, by the way, are a big deal. Men and women often shaved their heads to escape lice and heat, then wore wigs on special occasions. These wigs could be elaborate, braided with beads, or sometimes just practical and short. You run your hand across your own sweaty scalp and decide you're grateful no one expects you to maintain glossy wig hair while herding goats. Makeup is another layer of the morning ritual, though not just for glamour. You rub a little black coal under your eyes, and instantly you feel both fabulous and shielded from the glare of the sun. Scientists have found that the lead-based compounds in Egyptian cosmetics may have helped prevent eye infections too. So yes, your eyeliner is medicinal. Somewhere an ancient scribe is rolling his eyes at modern beauty influencers, muttering, "He did smoky eye first." As you adjust your belt and sling a satchel over your shoulder, you realize you look remarkably similar to almost everyone else in the village. Fashion here isn't about standing out, but blending into the steady rhythm of the community. That being said, you can still imagine wealthier neighbors swanning by in pleated linen gowns, gold jewelry glittering, and perfumed cones of wax melting slowly atop their heads, releasing fragrance as they walked. Try not to stare. It's hard to look glamorous when you still got crumbs of gritty bread in your teeth. One last check. Amulet in place, eyeliner sharp, tunic only slightly itchy. You're ready. The sun has risen higher, the hum of insects fills the air, and farmers are already calling to one another across the fields. With breakfast settled and your outfit secured, it's time to head out and join the endless work waiting beneath the blazing Egyptian sky.
By the time you peel yourself away from the heat of the fields, your skin feels tight from the sun, and you're grateful for the sudden coolness that comes when you step under the massive stone shadows of a temple. The shift is instant. Outside, brightness and sweat. Inside, gloom and a hush so heavy you almost feel guilty for breathing too loudly. The temple smells of resin and smoke.
Incense burns in shallow bowls, tendrils of fragrant haze curling upward and clinging to the painted walls. The air is thick, perfumed, and a little dizzying after hours of dust and grain. You cough lightly, earning a glare from a priest who clearly thinks your lungs should be more respectful. Mainstream fact: Egyptian temples weren't simply places of prayer for everyone. They were the domain of priests, administrators, and the gods themselves. Ordinary villagers rarely entered the sacred inner rooms. They lingered in outer courts, bringing offerings of food, beer, or flowers. The idea of personal worship wasn't really the point here. This was about cosmic order, the balance of Ma'at, and making sure the sun didn't forget to rise tomorrow. Your sandals tap against smooth flagstones, and you crane your neck upward. Columns painted in bright colors soar into shadow, carved with lotus blossoms and papyrus stalks. Imagine a forest of stone frozen mid-bloom. The paint is still vivid in places, though chipped and dulled by time. Historians still argue whether temples were repainted regularly in brilliant shades, or whether the faded colors we see now better reflect how villagers experienced them in everyday life. Priests glide past in spotless linen, shaved heads gleaming, carrying trays of bread and jars of beer to set before statues of gods. You catch a glimpse of a gilded figure, perhaps Amun or Ra or Hathor, half hidden in flickering lamplight. To the worshippers, these statues weren't symbols. They were living embodiments of the gods, housed and fed like royal guests. You wonder, only half joking, if the gods got tired of beer and bread 3 times a day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Temple rituals could involve waking up the god each morning, with priests carefully washing, dressing, and even applying makeup to the statue. Imagine starting your day by putting eyeliner on a giant falcon-headed deity. It sounds absurd, but to the Egyptians, it was as serious as feeding your family. It kept the world turning. The chanting begins, low and rhythmic, echoing through the stone halls. Drums beat softly, a deep pulse you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. The words are in ancient hymns, praising the gods, promising devotion. You don't catch the details, but you don't need to. The cadence itself is lulling. Combined with the thick incense and cool shadows, you could almost fall asleep standing there. A draft of cooler air slides through the temple doorway, carrying faint street sounds back inside, the bray of a donkey, the squabble of children. It feels strange to remember the noisy, messy village life just outside, while standing here among solemn chants and glowing statues. 2 worlds side by side, one dust, sweat, and onions, the other smoke, silence, and shimmering gods. You linger a while longer, watching the dance of light and shadow on painted stone. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the rhythm of the chants. But eventually, you step back out into the blazing sun, eyes watering at the sudden glare. The Nile gleams once more in the distance, and a barge is gliding lazily along the water, reed bundles stacked high on its deck. The temple's shadows fade behind you, but their coolness clings like a faint perfume, a reminder of gods who must be constantly appeased so ordinary mortals like you can keep trudging through another day.
The sun blazes overhead, and stepping back into its glare feels like walking into an oven. You squint toward the Nile, where barges drift slowly downstream, sails puffing with the faint breeze. The river is no longer just scenery, it's the highway of Egypt, carrying grain, stone, people, and gossip from village to village. You head closer, drawn to the steady creak of wood against current. The first thing you notice is the boats themselves. Made of planks lashed together, sealed with pitch and stuffed with reeds, they look fragile, almost flimsy, but they float with surprising confidence. The sails are square, made of linen that catches the sun until it glows like parchment. Crewmen pull ropes, their muscles taut, while others steer with long oars. The Nile is so calm compared to an ocean that most boats don't need to be massive. Yet somehow these vessels carried blocks of stone for temples and pyramids. Mainstream fact, even the colossal obelisks weighing hundreds of tons were floated downriver on specially designed barges. Picture that. Your morning commute includes a skyscraper lying sideways. You step onto a smaller merchant barge and find yourself surrounded by bundles of reeds, jars of fish sealed with mud, and baskets of figs so ripe their sweet smell overwhelms the air. A trader grins, offering you a taste of dried dates, sticky and chewy, while another boasts about her basket of onions as if it were treasure. Commerce here is loud but oddly friendly, full of exaggerated claims and cheerful bartering. One quirky tidbit, Egyptians sometimes transported live birds in wicker cages stacked high on boats, their squawking echoing across the water. You can imagine the chaos, hundreds of honking geese crammed together, flapping wings while sailors shout over the noise. Historians still argue whether these river convoys were carefully scheduled under state control, or more like a free-for-all where private traders just shouted until someone listened. Either way, you're grateful you only have to ride along, not manage the inventory. The river air is different from the fields, cooler, carrying hints of water lilies and damp reeds. You lean against the rail, feeling the gentle sway as the boat cuts through the current. Fish leap occasionally, flashing silver, and a fisherman casts to net with a practice flick. His children splash nearby, laughing as they try to scoop up minnows with their hands. You almost forget the heat beating down, soothed by the rocking rhythm of the boat. On the opposite bank, you spot another barge passing, this one painted with bright red stripes. Its deck is crowded with pottery jars, and a group of musicians strum lyres and beat hand drums. Music on the Nile. It's part entertainment, part advertisement. Why not lure customers with a catchy tune? You half expect one of them to break into an ancient jingle for onions, but mercifully they don't. The boat glides past fields dotted with workers, then by clusters of papyrus reeds so thick they form floating islands. Birds nest among them, storks lifting off with heavy flaps of their wings. The river is alive, a constant hum of movement and sound, so different from the still sanctity of the temple. This is Egypt's bloodstream, carrying everything that sustains daily life. As you drift, your mind wanders to the bigger picture. The Nile doesn't just connect villages, it binds the whole kingdom. Pharaohs relied on this watery road to project power, to collect taxes, to feed armies. Without the river, there is no Egypt, only scattered desert settlements lost to the sands. You run your fingers along the warm wood of the boat, aware that every plank, every rope, every oar is part of a system that has lasted thousands of years. The boat pulls into a small dock, and you step on sun-bleached planks, ears ringing slightly from the shift in sound. Behind you, the crew calls out as they unload goods, fish for figs, reeds for pottery, onions for dates. The bartering begins again, loud and spirited, echoing across the water. You smile, realizing the Nile isn't just a river, it's a floating marketplace, a stage, a lifeline. And for the moment, you're part of its endless current.
You step into the rising heat, linen rustling as your sandals, if you're lucky enough to own them, scuff the packed earth. The path winds past low mud brick homes, each with clay jars stacked outside, and then opens onto the wide, dazzling spread of farmland. The Nile's gift lies before you, flat and fertile, a green carpet stitched with channels of irrigation water. This is where most Egyptians spend their waking hours, bent, sunburnt, and patient, coaxing crops from the soil. A farmer waves you over, gesturing toward a pair of oxen tethered to a wooden plow. The animals grunt and shuffle, their hooves sinking into damp ground as the blade cuts a shallow trench. It's not glamorous, but it works. And it's one of those mainstream facts. Egyptian agriculture was so efficient that it produced enough surplus grain to feed laborers, priests, and even entire armies. Without these endless hours in the fields, there would be no pyramids, no temples, no golden treasures. Just a lot of very hungry people staring at an empty horizon. The sun climbs quickly, harsh and unrelenting, reflecting off the wet soil until it feels like you're standing inside a baking oven. Sweat trickles down your temple, and you think longingly of shade.
Workers sing as they labor, a rhythmic chant meant to synchronize movements. Their voices rise and fall like the river itself, steady and hypnotic. You try humming along, but you're off beat. Your contribution earns you a few amused side eyes. Children dart between rows, chasing after frogs startled from their hiding spots. One boy shows you a small net woven from reeds, proudly declaring he'll catch fish for supper. You nod, though secretly you're wondering if you'd rather stick to bread. Frogs, fish, grain, it's all tied to the river, and the rhythm of flood and harvest keeps everyone's lives locked in its tide. And here's a quirky tidbit. Egyptian farmers sometimes trained baboons to help harvest figs. Yes, baboons. Imagine trying to manage a troop of furry coworkers who are just as likely to eat the produce as they are to hand it over. Whether this was a widespread practice or just a weird anecdote recorded once, historians still argue. But now you can't shake the image of monkeys running a fig farm with questionable efficiency. Back in the field, the plow moves slowly, carving its furrows as men toss seed into the damp earth. Women follow, pressing the grain lightly into place with their toes, rhythmic and careful. Everyone works together because the Nile's generosity has to be seized quickly. Miss the window and you risk losing a year's food supply. A gust of hot wind blows sand across the fields, stinging your eyes. You blink furiously, eyeliner smudging, and realize just how unforgiving this environment is. Without constant irrigation and endless human labor, the desert would reclaim these green strips in a heartbeat. That's why fields are lined with dikes and channels, all maintained by hand. A farmer crouches by one now, scraping mud into place to direct the trickle of water where it's most needed. You squat beside him, trying to help, though your efforts only result in a small mudslide. He laughs kindly, shakes his head, and shoos you back before you ruin the whole system. Overhead, a flock of geese honks noisily, circling before landing near the riverbank. Egyptians domesticated geese long before chickens became common here. Geese eggs and meat are valuable, though a bit gamey, and you realize that catching one would probably be a sport all its own. For now, the honking chorus becomes background music to the endless rustle of grain stalks in the wind. You glance at the horizon, shimmering in the distance, and think about how precarious this life must have been. 1 year of poor flooding could mean famine. Yet Egyptians managed for millennia, developing calendars, storage systems, and state granaries. Historians still argue whether ordinary villagers truly trusted the pharaoh to intercede with the gods for good floods, or if most people simply relied on their own stubborn luck. Either way, you keep your head down, push through the heat, and pretend you're used to it. Your back aches just from watching. You rub your shoulders, realizing you haven't even done the hard work yet. But that's the point. Daily labor here isn't glamorous or epic. It's repetitive, sweaty, and necessary. And yet there's a strange calm in it, a rhythm that lulls your thoughts, like the soft buzz of insects or the low chant of workers in the sun. The day stretches long, the Nile gleams, and you feel both exhausted and strangely soothed. Farming here is less about glory and more about survival. But it's survival that builds everything else: temples, palaces, even the history we're quietly wandering through right now.